Welcome to Your Limitless Life, the podcast where creativity meets transformation. I'm Jane Bellante, artist, coach, and entrepreneur, here to help you let go of fear, embrace your power, and create the life and business you've always dreamed of. Each week, we'll explore the tools and stories that inspire growth and action. If you're ready to break free and live your limitless life, you're in the right place. Now let's begin. So welcome to the Your Limitless Life podcast, Christina Kubasta. So excited you're here.
I'm so happy to be here.
So I am going to wager that none of the people that normally listen to this podcast, they probably don't know who you are. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. So I'm really excited to be here. I got to meet Jane last year when she came to Art Adventure at Shakrag Alley Center for the Arts, where I'm executive director. And it is a wonderful place to visit. It's a wonderful place to work. And one of the reasons I love being there is just that I'm surrounded by creativity in all sorts of forms. So at Shakrag Alley, we have mixed media, we have 2D, we have glass blowing that we launched last year.
Yes.
We have fiber arts, heritage craft, robust youth program in the summer. We have all these things. But I actually came to Shake Rag because I'm a writer and a poet, and I left academia, which is something that I think some people have started to make some switches in their lives. And I was a university professor for nearly 20 years.
Oh my God.
And I sort of got to this place where I was thinking, although I loved teaching and I loved my students, I sort of got tired of the administrative work, and started trying to think about where could my skills translate. And so building curriculum and working with artists in all different mediums, all different genres, just really seemed to be a good fit for me. And I also felt like I wasn't really being fed in my creative life in the space I was in. I had some writing colleagues and some art colleagues, but it wasn't a school that really sort of had that at the forefront. And so I came to Shake Rag about 2.5 years ago, and came to build curriculum and then moved into the executive director role. And so I found it just to be a wonderful place, not only in terms of the kind of programming we offer, which is really sort of close to my heart, but also in terms of my own creative practice, in terms of my own writing. It's just a wonderful place to be.
Oh my God.
Um,
Yes, I love it so much. It's so magical there. And that's crazy because I have a master's in adult education. And so I also taught at a university for a little while, just as an adjunct, but
mhm.
kind of walked out of there thinking, what am I doing? Why did I get this? And I love that. I'm seeing some parallels between us that I didn't know existed. So that's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and it can be wonderful. I started as an adjunct as well, and again, loved being in the classroom and loved those interactions with students. But then when more of your time is taken up, doing assessments and committee meetings and, arguing about things than actually engaging in,
Yeah.
what you love,
Right.
it just didn't seem to be the place for me anymore. So.
I get that. And of course, engaging in whatever creative thing you love, which is writing or poetry, like that is where you do feel free. And so there is sort of a relationship between being in chains and then being free when you step into what you're actually meant to do. And I don't know, I just love that. And Shake Rag is like what an incredible magical place to be.
It really is. And one of the things I've loved is that so my grandmother Lori was sort of the artist in my life who introduced me to things, and she was a weaver. She also was a painter. She taught me to weave when I was quite young, and I would go over to my grandparents' cottage, and my grandfather would go up fishing in the morning, and my grandma and I would get up, and she would sort of teach me how to do things. And so in my space here in Mineral Point, I have her paintings on the wall. I have her pillows. I have her needlepoint pillow next to me. I have her
Oh,
weavings on the wall. And I've feel like I've really gotten to reconnect with her in a way. I have her spinning wheel, and so I'm teaching myself to spin again.
Mm.
And I have some of her yarn. She passed a while ago, but I
Yeah.
have like these bits and pieces of sort of tactile fiber arts that was sort of the first way that I engaged with art when I was young.
Oh,
And her paintings are palette knife. So there's something about the tactile, I think, that first attracted me to art and to creativity. And I think that does inform my writing. And that's the wonderful thing is thinking about how these different art forms interact. So
yeah.
even if I'm not engaged in writing at the moment, I'm speaking to our artist teachers. I'm thinking about, I mean, mixed media is sort of our flagship at Shake Rag Alley.
Yeah.
And so getting to talk to different artists about their work, how they put things together. In my own work, juxtaposition and layering of language and things like that is really important.
Yes,
So
I can
there,
really tell.
yeah, and so there are parallels there, and I'm inspired by other art forms, by other ways of making. And so it's interesting to see how all of those things kind of come together.
Oh, that's so cool. So I am not, and I said this before we even started, but I'm not like an expert on poetry. I do love poetry. I also have lots of different poets that I use to inform my maybe my art journaling spreads, things like that. So I love to cut words and put them with my art. And so I love poetry a lot. And just reading through your poems, I just really took a pause for a moment because I wanted to really sort of grasp and understand because you have your style is so layered, and so I wanted to really understand where you were coming from. And I think that a lot of the poems that you sent me that I read, they really touch on a lot of roles that women are expected to play. Would you say that I am, would you say that I'm close to cracking?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when I think of my own work, and this will be my third full length collection coming out. I I grew up a small town in Wisconsin, and I would say that what I write about is often sort of the fraught context that girls and women inhabit.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of ways that comes out. But I think that we navigate these spaces where sometimes we're not sure what's going on, but it seems a little odd. Or, we kind of complete a moment or we complete a situation and then we think back on it and we think, oh, that kind of reminded me of something, or oh, I need to go back and revisit that. And I
Yeah.
think that's first and foremost in my work is talking about those sorts of uncomfortable moments or those things that we end up attempting to navigate as best we can.
Yeah.
Um, and there'll be moments as an adult woman where I'll think back on something that happened as a child and I try to make that connection or sort of bridge those moments and figure out what is it about this thing that reminded me of this other thing. And then in my work, I try to kind of attach them or link them together or kind of ask on the page the question, what do these two things have in common or how are they linked?
I
And
think, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I try to do that, I think, by sometimes just setting them side by side,
Oh,
or invoking an image. And it's natural imagery or it's rural imagery. And I try to make those connections on the page.
I think that is like really, really cool because it's really diving into maybe limiting beliefs, maybe the shadow self a little bit. And it's something that I do for myself with journaling and really trying to figure out what I'm making things mean and what they really mean and what it means about me and, where some of the ways that I keep myself stuck, where they originated so that I can sort of grow through that and change that. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. And also, I think, too, both sort of in my work and then maybe a larger question about art is I'm not really interested in the answer. I'm interested in the question.
Oh, I love.
So, setting those things side by side so we can sort of look at them, turn them over, maybe rearrange them and see what the connections are. But I'm not really interested in a poet as having the answer or in providing the answer to a reader. That to me doesn't feel really authentic.
Yeah.
I don't think I can answer for anyone else what their experiences might be or what the answers might be. I don't know that I can answer that for myself. I'm more interested in, huh, oh, mm, uh, I'm more interested in that than I
Yeah.
am in here is my bold pronouncement about what I think. I find that quite frankly kind of boring and kind of hmm, I don't want to use the word paternalistic because I don't think it's quite the same thing, but I think it's a little bit inauthentic when a poet's voice says, "And here's the big lesson I've learned, and let me impart it to you." I'm not really into that.
Right, and that's probably it. I think that's probably not the job of a poet. The poet does inspire you to think, to think deep,
Right,
right?
right.
It doesn't, you're not necessarily telling people, you're not a teacher in a class, right? You're just like, let's think about this a little bit.
Well, and I think the best teachers also don't do that. The best teacher would encourage, the learner to ask questions for themselves
Yeah, the deep
too.
dive. Yeah.
Right.
And
And
speaking of, oh, go ahead. If we,
I was just going to say with art, the same thing, right? Ideally, you would go away from some wonderful class thinking, huh, let me take these raw materials or let me take these weird bits and arrange them in some way that's interesting and challenging and will
yeah,
encourage me to keep asking questions, not to think, oh, I've got it done and here's a cohesive whole that I'm no longer interested in engaging with.
right. And then it gets boring.
It does. And who wants to be bored,
Not me.
right?
So I really do like speaking of, I think your poems really dive into some raw and vulnerable experiences. So I really want to know first, how do you get to a place where you feel ready to write about it, but not only write about it, but like share it with everyone? It's no longer yours.
So I feel I don't think in speaking with other writers, I don't think that I'm necessarily normal in this way, but once I get something on the page, I don't want to say I feel disconnected from it because I don't, but I don't feel the kind of emotional investment where it feels odd to me to share. So once I get it on the page, once I've encapsulated it in language, um, it becomes a poem. It's no longer experience. And
Hmm.
I feel perfectly
Yeah,
comfortable talking about it and
detail.
sharing it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that.
It
Yeah,
becomes art,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's different than confession or this thing I've got to share with my bestie because I'm feeling some kind of way about it. It
Yeah,
becomes something different. And I feel it's, good because I've made something.
right. How do you decide, like, because I do think too in your work, it's tied to a lot of memories. It's tied to a lot of you looking back on your life, which we just kind of touched upon. But how do you decide which stories or which moments to even write about?
Well, I think if you write about everything, then at some point you decide, well, this is good or this is interesting. Maybe not good, but interesting, right?
Yeah.
And then there are other things that aren't interesting enough yet, so you save them for later,
No, I love
which
that.
maybe ties into your theme, right? Your perfectionism theme.
It
So
really does.
if it's not great enough yet, or if it's not interesting, it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's not ready yet. So just like save it.
Yeah. Yes, and I do. It's funny because a question was just put to me like, well, I do so many things and I never finish them, and that means I'm bad. And what, I had to reframe like, no, we're so creative, like it's just not done yet. Pick it up later, and you'll see the changes if you're just open. If you're just open to that, it's like the what is it, the echolocation with bats? You put it out and it comes back, right? It's like a
Mhm.
boomerang effect.
And maybe later is 2 weeks later, or maybe later is 20 years later. Who
Oh yeah,
cares? You
100%.
know?
Yes. Yeah.
So I have a file that I call bad poems, which is fine. I'll get to it later. I have a file that's just lines. Like I might write a whole poem in only like one line. So I just save that line and I put it somewhere else. So it's disconnected from the poem that I originally wrote it in. So I don't have to feel, um, that it has to stay in that context because I might love that one line and the
Yeah.
rest of the poem might not be something I want to engage with anymore. But I love that one line and I've then taken it out of the thing that was holding it back. And I might use that line in some other way.
Oh, I love that. Repurposing.
Right.
And also too, I think that, that line came out because it was, it's obviously came out because it was meant to be there. And it's like you're placing it in its place. You're placing it in its place. Like this is where it's meant to be. I love that where it's just more of like an organic, like I'm not going to judge myself as being a bad poet because I don't like this. I'm going to pick one line. Oh, I actually love this, so you're like circling it or highlighting it or whatever. And I don't know. I think something like that, I can equate that in art where like there's some things that I'll just put down marks or make a mess and I'll look at it and I'll go, okay, well, I don't really like this, but I do like this. So maybe I tear it out and that's used in collage or, something, something to keep me moving.
And sometimes, I do need to sort of print those lines on a page and actually cut them. And,
Mm.
I mean, because I think we get used to working on our computers, especially those of us who are writers.
Yeah.
And for some reason, it feels harder to disassemble a Word doc, you know, because we
Yeah.
think, oh, this is the thing I made. So like you have to print it out and maybe tear those pages or cut them, literally cut them, and then kind of remix them somewhere else. So turn them into a collage form so you can really think of them as fundamentally separate from, the piece it started as.
Oh, I love that. And, we are talking about perfectionism this month. And so for me, perfectionist, I've never identified as a perfectionist. I always sort of mess around and just figure it out, right? But perfectionism stops so many people from putting their art out there or even starting. Like, I don't know
Mhm.
how to use this. I'm going to screw it up. So I'm never going to open this, medium that I bought that I saw somebody else use that looks super cool, but I'm afraid to use it. it's not going to be perfect. So, like, how do you let yourself write without worrying about it being perfect?
So I think, and I don't know if it's the same with visual artists, but I feel like as writers, we receive a lot of advice. Like you have to have a particular way of working, right? You have to write every day, or writer's block is terrible. If you're afflicted with writer's block, you have to do XYZ to get over it. And I have to say, I think all of that is just ridiculous. I don't have a regular writing practice. I don't write every day, and I quite frankly I don't care. Um, I write when I feel like writing, and if I don't feel like writing, there are you know, 97 different things I can do instead that will inform my practice later.
Yeah.
So if I don't feel like writing, I read, or I make something else. I'm really into right now, like hand sewing. I don't know why,
Oh,
but
cool.
I feel like getting out my machine takes a lot of time and energy and
Yeah.
effort, and it takes up the kitchen table.
And
So
the
I
bobbin is always bad and
and you have to change the color every time.
right. Yeah.
Seriously. So I do a lot of hand sewing and I've really been into like repairing like vintage clothing lately and making it work for me.
Nice.
But I feel like I'm just going to say that counts. So like if I'm making something beautiful or weird or quirky or I'm 4'11" and actually I'm almost 50, so I'm shrinking. I'm probably 4'10" and a half. Everything has to be altered to fit my body that is
Yeah.
not the shape of bodies off the rack. I feel like that all counts as creative time. So, if I'm not in a writing mood, or sometimes I don't have anything to say, people who know me would argue that I never have nothing to, but if I don't have anything to say that's, literary, I just do something else. And so I feel like I'm a workhorse, but I'm not a perfectionist.
Hmm.
And I feel like being messy counts for everything if you
So good.
care. First of
Yeah.
all, you don't have to count. Like you don't have to count anything. So
Hmm.
sometimes I'll write a lot, if I'm inspired by something, I'll write a lot. And some of it'll be absolute, you know, ugh.
Yeah.
And some of it'll be all right. And every once in a while there'll be something that's really good. But I don't care. Like
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's like I'm equating that to art journaling. So people are like, "Well, I don't know what to like." They feel like they have to make some kind of masterpiece in their art journal, and that's literally the place to play and mess around and make messes because that is how you learn. You're still in a state of flow when you're sitting and messing around. Like I have a stencil here and there's a paper here, and then I'm putting this paste on top of this, and oh my God, that didn't work. So what do? You either cry and hate yourself, or you just collage over it or paint over it and
Mhm.
start again. And I think to your point about like doing the hand sewing, that's still something that puts you in the flow state. And the flow state is where you receive. So, I think that people should do more of that, more detaching instead of like beating themselves up for, oh my God, I should be writing right now. I'm supposed to write a page a day, and you're like, you're beating yourself up. I guess I'm not a writer. It's the same thing with art. And all of that creativity is valid. All of that puts you in the flow. And that is the golden sweet spot, I think.
Well, but also just like engaging with the materials. So like with art journaling, like there is nothing I love more than like again, I'm a tactile person, like touching
Oh,
the different tooth of the papers or like touching a decal edge. Is there anything more fabulous than that? Or
I
like,
get in trouble for that. I'm like, I just
right?
touch it. Can I touch
But
it?
or like hand tearing papers, like I
Mhm.
mean, just like hand tear like it's beautiful. And I'm
Mhm.
the same, like if I find like a gorgeous vintage lace, like just like pet it for a while. Like it's really nice.
Happy yourself in it. Yeah.
But that's the way I feel about words. Like sometimes, I mean, I feel like a lot of writers are dictionary dorks, right? Like we were the kids who grew up reading dictionaries for
Right.
fun.
Yeah.
But just do that for a while, and I don't know, your writing practice could be like you discover a new word
Mhm.
once a week, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, who care? Like, I mean, those are all things, and that's engaging with materials, whether you do anything with them or not, is kind of, tertiary or whatever. But I
Yeah,
mean,
I think your brain remembers though. Even if
mhm,
you have the experience and you're kind of filing that in your little file cabinet in the back so that when you are, for writers, it's writer's block, or for artists, it's like you're kind of stuck and you don't know where to go next. Your brain remembers stuff and oh my God, remember when we tore that paper and we put it on this way and then we put the black and blah blah. Like
mhm.
it gets you excited. It sort of your brain sort of reaches for those solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's like muscle memory, right?
Yeah.
Like, especially if you're like touching the paper.
And I do. I do.
Mhm.
So, do you think perfectionism is tied to control, or do you think it's tied to fear of letting go?
Okay, well, I do have control issues, but um, I don't necessarily think that's a problem.
No, not
Um,
necessarily.
you know, wait, you have to repeat your question.
So, is perfectionism tied to control or the fear of letting go? Or the fear of being seen? Because the fear of letting go is kind of the same thing, where like, all right,
Yeah, that's
here I go. I'm going to release this. People are going to look at it, read it, see it, touch it, feel it, wear it, whatever.
well, it sort of depends. Can you create for yourself? Because if you create for yourself and you keep everything for yourself, then nobody sees it, so it
Mhm.
doesn't matter. So if your perfectionism is such that you can't even do it for yourself, that's like a whole nother layer,
Yeah,
right? Like, can
that's a
your
problem. That is a
if
problem.
if nobody sees your sock drawer, does it matter if your sock drawer is a hot mess? So if
Right.
nobody sees what you create and you're just doing it for yourself, but you still can't let go, I feel like that's a whole nother layer.
Yeah, and that is where I notice that a lot of people that listen to me or watch my videos or whatever, that is where they're coming from. They can't even let go to create for themselves, because it's not going to be perfect.
Yeah.
It's a tough question.
Yeah, I feel like I feel like there's some deep deprogramming then that's needed.
Oh, I mean, 100%. And that's, I mean, that's what this podcast is all about is like figuring out what in the heck you're telling yourself so that you stop stopping yourself from doing what it is that you want to do, whether it's art, whether it's your life, or if you have a creative business, like either one of those, any of those, it all ties back together, you know. I think perfectionism is such a good topic because where is the bar? Nobody can ever define what is actually perfect and when they'll ever get there.
But that's because it doesn't actually exist, right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And what I really have been talking about is, we are humans. We are here to learn and grow and evolve. And so, like, what if that is perfect? And if you just allowed yourself to be who we are?
Well, and what if the goal becomes something, what if the goal is pleasure as opposed to something else,
Yeah.
right? Because if,
Yeah. Beating yourself up, like feeling like crap all the time, telling yourself
right.
you're not good enough, that doesn't feel like pleasure.
And I wonder too, I mean, I feel like if you were speaking to a fiction writer, this conversation would be different because fiction writers at least have I mean, and I do write fiction, but it's never going to be fiction that's going to make money, right? Because that's just not the kind I write.
Yeah.
And so it's just not what I care about.
Mhm.
But poets aren't. So in a way, we're freed from the demands of the marketplace.
Hmm.
And so that means that we can write differently. Um, so
I was going to say, like, I
just
know that
can.
you brought some poems, and I think this might be a really good time for you to read something because I do feel like after I read the poems you sent me, like even though we've met and whatever, and we didn't hang out a ton, but it really helped me understand who you were just reading
Mm,
pieces, So
sure.
let's let's have you pick one or two that you brought and give our listener slash viewer a bit of you.
All right. So I will say I tend to think I'm generally a pretty happy, joyful person. My poems do tend to be a little dark though, so I just like to give people a heads up. So in my new book, this is the first poem, and it's kind of before any of the poems and sections. And it's called 250 word bio, preferably third person. Offering can mean a thing presented or sacrificed in worship or devotion, in tribute or as token of esteem. My father gave me the shorter Oxford English dictionary because he didn't know about rows of fabric-clad volumes full of citations. That's what I wanted. All the possibilities of that verbal noun. That's what you think when you receive a Facebook message from a former teacher. When a person is chosen, complex feelings may accompany being chosen. What it means to be a very smart girl, a girl who can go far, beyond where you are, which is why he takes such interest, why he worries years later because he didn't you, that you might think yourself unattractive or unworthy or unlovable. You're told you've always been precocious, that at your first doctor's appointment you flirted with the doctor when he changed your diaper. Each story presents a mirror of itself. You dream about a species of hummingbird that flies very low to the ground, dies if looked at too long. You spend your days pointing it out, then begging people to look away. When asked why you're a poet, you answer instead why you're a good eater. There's nothing I won't try. I don't throw the skins away, and I've been known to gnaw a bone.
I love that so much. And of course that was the first one I read because that was the first, at the top of what you sent me. And so immediately I was like, oh my gosh, I need to read more. So why did you start with that in your book?
Um, so I do get asked why I'm a poet, and I never have an answer. Like I feel like I don't know, when you're asked why you're an artist, do you have an answer?
It's just who I am, really.
Yeah, I feel like it, I mean, it's a good question, I suppose, but I don't know how to answer it.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I've always written. I feel like I've always thought of language as a vehicle for, how to share who I am.
Mm.
So I don't know how to answer that. I suppose I think in image and story and metaphor, but because it's so integral to who I am, I don't know how to answer it.
Yeah.
Um, it's how I understand myself,
Mhm.
but you can't just say that. I don't know how to answer that question. So I feel like a poem like that, because so much of the collection does deal with these experiences and these situations, that I've inhabited, and trying to explain myself to myself or myself to others
Mm.
through language, through memory, through the things that happen. I felt like that would be a good introduction to the collection, to myself.
Yeah.
Um, so, so yeah, it's the piece that starts the book. And seriously, I mean, I order fried chicken and I just like peel the skins and just eat the fried chicken skins because I mean, that's the best part. And then I've had several people in my life tell me that eating food around me because of the way I just, chew on the bones is gross. So, I mean, I feel like that's a good introduction to me too.
That's so perfect, right? Vulnerable, raw, and all.
Mhm.
So, what is the name of your new book?
It's called Under the Tented Skin, and it's coming out from Unsolicited Press, which is out of Portland.
Okay.
Under the Tented Skin is a line in a poem elsewhere in the book. Um, so, in picking that, I was thinking about sort of who we are, under the bodies that go out into the world, right? So who we are in terms of that. But the line comes from a poem. Where it imagines sort of a big tent, like a circus tent,
Yeah.
and it uses kind of the language of circus and spectacle and sideshow to talk about who we are.
Wow.
Um, and then there are a lot of poems. I am a person who really enjoys tattoos, and so there's a number of tattoo poems in there too. So it kind of references that a little bit as well.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'm really excited about it. Unsolicited Press is doing the Year of the Woman. They're publishing all uh, women authors.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm pretty excited about it.
So, like when you're writing, how do you stay true to your voice instead of getting caught up in what you think people might expect from you?
I'd connect that back to again, some of that advice we get as writers, right? There's this idea about anxiety of influence, and if you read too much of someone else, you might start to sound like their voice. And I think that can happen, although I think that can be a useful kind of moment. Um, so you learn and you can write an homage to people, but I feel like that can be a part of your evolution as a writer, right? Like trying on clothes, right?
Yeah.
You try on clothes and that helps you figure out what you like or
Yeah.
what feels good or what feels natural, and then you end up writing through that other voice.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, I love that explanation.
I've I've enjoyed sometimes really negative feedback I get from people. People sometimes find my writing vulgar. I'm okay with that. Too visceral or brutal or abrupt. I'm okay with that. Um, Not comforting, that it's kind of challenging, and why can't you write about nice things sometimes?
Yeah, I think that's
Um,
part of what art is, though. It really is pointing at the raw, vulnerable, visceral things in life.
that's the kind of art I enjoy. I mean, I prefer to be made uncomfortable by art.
Hmm.
If I'm comfortable, I'm kind of bored. I would like to be challenged in all things, all the time. I would like to be uncomfortable. I would like to be made to rethink my assumptions, and my comfort. And so that is the kind of work that I also want to create.
Do you want to read another poem?
Sure. Um, So, is it all right if I read a slightly longer one?
Yeah.
Okay. So this one is called Vantage Points. Hmm. And I didn't send this one to you, I don't think, Jane.
I don't, yeah, that doesn't sound familiar.
Vantage Points. We arrive, handfuls of bees and sweat, to wide front porches and grandparents waiting, cousins somewhere nearby, unable to sit still, scattered in the woods or upstairs rooms. We arrive, road weary, and slog the air up the stairs to held open arms after some interminable travel packed into cars, long hours. The best vantage point, the way back, a third row seat that faced the retreating road, so whoever sat there could see where they've been, but never where they were going. That old Volvo ended up my older brother's teenage ride, and once it lost its doors, a shelter for our family dog, before some local business took it off our hands for the county fair, demolition derby, and eventually some wrecking yard's crusher ate it. Maybe the leftover bits recycled into new cars, floor mats or brake pedals for new sedans and new families. So it's all our vantage point now. No skin to touch or sweat to exchange. So instead, we watch the receding asphalt ticker, ticker, ticker of intermittent center line to parse together what was. Middle of some joke, I recount the silvered pad I slept on to curtail bedwetting. How what was supposed to buzz shorted and began to zap. How those mini shocks worked, retraining me. My friend, a mother, asks the obvious. Why did you start wetting the bed? And I don't remember exactly, but no, ticker, 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 something happened. Center line. Next time my mother and I sit across the span of her porch, I ask about the shock mat, my regression, about that time. After my emergency appendectomy, 2 years old, I started wetting the bed again. A brother soon to be born, and my mother apologizes. She says the pad was only supposed to buzz, not shock, but she was so tired. Couldn't handle the idea of two of us in diapers. They tried everything. An old fainting couch moved into my room, thinking this lower furniture might help get me up easier. And I remember it. Purple velour bolster pillow, her overwhelmed. I knew it was something, ticker, 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 center line, some event. She mentions that surgery, my brother's birth, the dog attack that scars my face, some whitened memory of the emergency room, how the doctor wouldn't let me have a mirror, no matter how many times I asked. So my recollection is sense memory. Fingertips magnify what's there, the sutures and ties and puckers of skin reattached to skin. One theory is that female dogs are more aggressive during heat cycles. Another that my appearance triggered some response in her. She'd bit another similar looking girl in the past. I say I don't remember much of my childhood before 8 or 9, but there are these moments: shock mat, anesthesia, fingertips finding the contours of a wound. The way back seat allows us to only look back. Windshields pop and metal squeals, but someday we'll approach each other closer and closer, not measuring distance and stopping before we touch. As my mother says, there was so much going on.
Wow. I absolutely love that. And it actually, I mean, it definitely brought me back to childhood too. My brother had the shock mat, the station wagon with the seat turned around in the back. Yeah,
That seat was magical. We
yeah.
went on cross-country trips to Texas, to California. And yeah, riding in that way back seat. It was probably very unsafe. That's probably why
Oh,
we don't have them anymore. But yeah, we wanted the way back seat.
yeah, it was the
Mhm.
best. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for doing this. I have enjoyed it immensely. And if people want to get your book or learn more about you, first, where do they go? And then how will they get your book once it is put out there?
Thanks. Yeah, my book comes out in May. I'm super excited. So I've got a website, ckubasta.com. So CKUBASTA.com.
And they'll all be in the
Um,
show notes as well, too.
oh, thanks. Yeah. So it's up there. There's a playlist. If you want to get in the mood for my book, you can listen to a fun playlist. And then you can also check out Shake Rag Alley at shakeragalley.org. We just launched our new catalog
Oh,
for
so fun
2025.
too.
Yeah.
Of
So we've
course, I
got
got it. I had to find what page I was on first, and then I was able to like go and look through the
I
whole.
think that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've got Art Adventure, which is where you and I met last year,
Mm.
which is our mixed media retreat in August, which is super fun. You can make a weekend of it. A bunch of workshops every day. But throughout the year, we've got programming. We're starting glass blowing in February because we did figure out last year that glass blowing works better in the cooler months of the year
That
through December. But yeah, we've got everything from, again, writing, mixed media, just lots and
it
lots of fun.
is really amazing. And the whole town of Mineral Point is just it's just magical. There's galleries everywhere and little coffee shops and great little restaurants, and the buildings are so cool.
The architecture here is just beautiful.
Yeah.
And you can walk everywhere.
Hmm.
I mean, there's hills though.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. There's
but if you like a good workout, you can walk everywhere. The hills are great.
And I'm actually teaching there in June. We are having
Mhm.
our Voyage Back to Yourself retreat. So information about that will be in the show notes as well. And then I'm teaching there in October. The my really one of my favorite things to teach, and it's the Telling Your Story class where we will create an artist book magically.
And everyone had so much fun in your class last year, Jane. So we had lots of requests to bring you back, and your energy was
Oh.
just, we had such a good time. So
I,
yeah, we're so
I
excited
just,
to have you
oh,
back.
it's so fun. And if you have not been there, I encourage everybody to try to get there because it is just a magical little place. So thank you so much for doing this. And I hope to have you back after your book launches, and we'll see what you're doing after that.
Thank you so much. It was great to talk with you.